The African aviation market has seen plenty of change in the past few years. While South African Airways has struggled to stay afloat, Ethiopian Airlines and Kenya Airways have become stronger global competitors. Between bases in Johannesburg, Addis Ababa, and Nairobi, each has battled to become the leading hub in East Africa. But how is each faring now in 2021? And which will ultimately succeed in becoming the dominant airline for the continent? Founded in 1934, South African Airways is one of the oldest airlines in Africa and a leading international carrier. However, as a state-owned enterprise, the airline has required several massive government-subsidized bailouts in recent years.
As we said, SAA is in danger of liquidation as the airline's future remains uncertain ahead of today's creditors' meeting.
SAA owes aircraft leasing companies, I read, around 30 billion rand.
It's currently grounded and undergoing a business reorganization, but can it make a turnaround to get back in the air? As SAA seeks a new path forward, other airlines have capitalized on its relative absence from the skies. Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airlines have undergone rapid expansion in recent years, growing their network of international connections. The past decade has seen a battle between the pair to grow as African hub-based airlines. Both these airlines launched ambitious plans after the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, and each has had varying levels of success. In 2010, Ethiopian was flying just over 3 million passengers per year, and Kenya Airways 2.9 million. Meanwhile, South African Airways was flying almost 9 million. Fast forward to 2019, the most recent year for which data is available, and Ethiopian now flew 13.3 million passengers, claiming the top spot in Africa. Kenya Airways was flying 4.9 million, 6th place in Africa, and South African Airways traffic had fallen to 4.6 million. The situation has only worsened for SAA since then. We take a look now at each of these airlines in turn, highlighting their rises and falls to where they are now. With over 80 years of continual service, South African Airways was one of the first carriers in Africa. Egypt Air, founded in 1932, is the only African carrier older than SAA. SAA previously operated as Union Airways, but in February 1934, the newly formed South African government acquired Union Airways and the flag carrier was born. It has remained government-owned since. The airline expanded rapidly after the Second World War with a fleet of Lockheed Lodestar aircraft that operated domestic routes. Flights to Europe started in 1944. The first route was a 3-day journey from Johannesburg to Bournemouth with an Avro York aircraft and was known as the Springbok service. The DC-4 and Lockheed Constellation were soon added to the fleet. In 1953, the airline started jet services with the de Havilland Comet, then moving to the Boeing 707 in 1960. Services to Sydney and New York were added in the late 1960s, and the addition of the 747 in 1971 opened up many new routes as well. It faced a major test in the 1980s when a number of routes were halted due to growing international opposition to apartheid. Many of these routes did not resume until the 1990s. The airline seemed to flourish once again though, adding the 747-400 in 1991 and a new A320 fleet for regional services. It joined the Star Alliance in 2006, still at the time the largest airline by passenger number in Africa. This growth would not last long though. The airline has not turned a profit since 2011, and in 2019 it entered administration, a form of bankruptcy. Several factors contributed to this decline over the years. Since deregulation in the 1990s, local competition has become an increasing problem, with airlines such as Comair and FlySafair chipping away at SAA's market share. Other African airlines like Ethiopian and Kenya Airways also moved in to operate more connecting flights. Internal political and corruption issues continue to wreak havoc on finances. The airline suffered from a growing debt burden and fines imposed for uncompetitive behavior. With such costs, it struggled to invest in operations. The value of the South African rand also weakened over this time, greatly impacting fuel costs for the airline. It was also stuck with the A340 aircraft. Flying 4 engines at a time of rising fuel prices hurt its long-haul operations. Attempts to rescue the airline have drawn on since 2019. There have been issues with promised government funding and labour disputes. Many hope a revived SAA may take to the skies by July 2021, but this is far from certain. Whenever it does, it'll be a shadow of its former self, and it'll still have the troublesome A340s to deal with. Meanwhile, the story of Ethiopian Airlines and its rise is very different, with rapid expansion in recent years. The airline started service in 1945 as part of plans to modernise the country. Over the next decade, it expanded with support from TWA and the US Export-Import Bank, adding 5 Douglas C-47 aircraft from the US government to its fleet, and later acquiring Convair and its DC-6 aircraft. In the 1980s and 1990s, it expanded as a hub carrier, as well as becoming the first African airline to order the Boeing 767. It introduced service to South Africa, Asia, and the US. The problems facing competitor South African Airways at this time, and the openings it provided, likely gave the airline a leg up in some markets. Its rise to the top position in Africa can be traced back to 2005. At the time, the airline's total traffic of 1.7 million passengers lagged behind South African Airways, Egypt Air, and Kenya Airways. It launched an ambitious plan to grow its passenger volume to 3 million by 2010. It met its target in financial year 2010-2011. Not content with this growth, it launched an even more ambitious plan to reach 18 million passengers and more than double its fleet size by 2025. It became the largest African carrier in 2019. As well as growing its hub traffic in Addis Ababa, it has also expanded through investment in other airlines. In 2013, it took a 49% stake in Malawi Airlines. Other investments include ASKI Airlines, Ethiopian Mozambique Airlines, and Zambia Airways. Now it's even looking at a possible South African Airways joint venture. In 2021, it sits in a strong position. Not only is it the largest African carrier, but it has also survived the slowdown better than its competitors. It started in a stronger financial position and has not sought a bailout, and has also proved agile and able to adapt. Of the 3 airlines, Kenya Airways is the latecomer, having only launched in 1977 out of the remains of what was then East African Airways. It flew the DC-9 and the Fokker F-27-200 locally, but started longer flights with 2 leased Boeing 707s from British Midland. It expanded its destinations and fleet significantly throughout the 1980s, again likely boosted by South African Airways' troubles. However, in the 1990s, it headed in a very different direction from both Ethiopian and South African, with privatisation. KLM took a 26% stake, the Kenyan government retained 23%, and the remaining 51% was publicly traded. In 2012, the government increased its holding to 29.8%, becoming the majority stakeholder. In spite of this shift, the airline has continued to grow steadily, as its increased passenger traffic indicates. This was not to last, though. While Ethiopian Airlines' bold expansion plans worked well, Kenya Airways started to suffer problems. Its expansion plan, Project Mawingu, led to overspending and losses. Additionally, bad fuel hedging and difficulties with KLM also contributed. Its passenger numbers have held firm, whereas those of Ethiopian have soared. In 2012, Kenya Airways carried 3.6 million passengers. 7 years later, in 2019, this had risen to only 4.9 million. In 2018, the company announced a turnaround plan, but with the current slowdown, it remains to be seen where this will head. And it may well once again become a government-owned company, as the government now owns 48.9%, with KLM's share reduced significantly to 7.8%. Before the slowdown in 2020, Africa was one of the fastest-growing aviation markets in the world. By late 2020, however, IATA predicted a drop in traffic of 54% and a GDP decline of $35 billion. However, Ethiopian Airlines has expressed optimism about the potential recovery. Isaias Woldemariam, Chief Commercial Officer at Ethiopian, explained this to Simple Flying in an interview. With just 10% of trade conducted within Africa, there remains huge potential for African airlines to grow. Overseas trade remains 80% dominated by foreign carriers. He said, "What I would like to see for Africa is for African aviation to continue growing, enabling African youth to have good employment. I would like to see Africa transacting with each other. We're such a big market for each other, there's a lot of possibility which we've not yet explored. It is our prediction that aviation for Africa has a bright future and the best is yet to come." The three airlines find themselves in very different positions, though, as the market recovers. Ethiopian Airline clearly looks well placed to continue its expansion. Kenya Airways could pick up if it sorts its nationalisation plan successfully. Others, including Royal Air Maroc, Egypt Air and Air Algerie, are also poised to grow. South African Airways is the biggest unknown. With its future in question as of early 2021, there are hopes it'll resume operations later this year. There could even be a collaboration with Ethiopian Airlines, which has offered a joint venture. Adding services in the South African market would be a great addition for Ethiopian with its more hub-based model. However, taking on debt and other problems could be a major liability, and it's not proposing to do this. The African aviation market has changed significantly over the past few decades. Ethiopian Airlines is clearly on the rise. Do you think this will continue? And what are the prospects for other airlines? Feel free to discuss these three airlines and others in the comments. Did you know that we publish over 175 stories every single week on simpleflying.com? Be sure to check the link in the description for more great stories just like this.